Hello and welcome to the open format. I would like to begin this episode by thanking all my subscribers. It's my first ever attempt at podcast, my own talking forum, my own platform where I can express myself liberally, freely, and as per your wishes. So start करता हूँ. Thank you to all my subscribers. 4 महीने ही हुए हैं, but at least I have got 160 odd subscribers. So I'm sure all these 160 odd subscribers have complete faith in my abilities, and of course they also expect me to get even better in this art of talking to you directly in this podcast. I'll try my best, and to all my subscribers and followers who in future would join me, would subscribe me, and of course would like to communicate with me, would like to talk to me as to what they want to see on this platform. It's your platform. It's totally your platform. It's up to your wishes, your comment, your feedback that crafts, molds my narrative for the next episode. In this episode, we'll talk about, as the year is ending, on something to do with the holidaying. But before that, please like, subscribe, and follow this channel. And please spread a word that anything to do with history of subcontinent, it's one-stop destination, the open format. तो शुरू करते हैं इस बार के एपिसोड की. हम बात कर रहे हैं, साल खत्म होने को आ रहा है, एंड ऑफ कोर्स वी हैव प्लान्स कि हम छुट्टियों पे जाएं, हम हॉलिडे पे जाएं, वेल वेकेशंस पे जाएं, एंड इन दिस सीजन स्पेशली इन द नॉर्थ इंडिया as it will get slightly more wintry and more cold as the day progresses. We look for some sun, some sand, some beaches, some warm vibes. Of course, I'm talking about not Goa, not Kerala, not the destinations you are thinking about. I'm talking about something which is, I would say, not lesser known at these days, but yes, pretty much known. And of course, highly wanted one, the Andaman Nicobar Islands, जिसमें सिर्फ कुछ ही हिस्से जो हैं जो हमारे टूरिज्म के लिए खुले हुए हैं. पूरा का पूरा जो अंडमान निकोबार द्वीप समूह है उसमें तकरीबन 572 आइलैंड्स हैं. इट्स आर्किपेलागो ऑफ 572 आइलैंड्स एंड ओनली 36 आर द वंस व्हिच आर इनहैबिटेड, जिसमें से तकरीबन 6 से 7 ऐसे हैं जहां पे यू हैव एक्सक्लूसिव एंड रियली इलैबोरेट टूरिस्ट अरेंजमेंट्स where you can enjoy yourself. You can go for skiing, you can go for scuba diving, you can go for deep sea diving, you can enjoy the cafes, the restaurants, you can walk around the resorts, you can taste the local delicacies, which I would recommend is extremely delicious, especially if you're going to Neil Islands. Please try the local fishes over there, try the local cuisine over there, the chutneys. These are small little things, but it's completely out of the world. I mean, for a long time, people of Andamans, local of Andamans, haven't really, got into the mainstream of any industrialization to say of. So that's why a lot of things that is available over there, which is local, is completely impeccable. It is really exotic. But in this episode, let me start with a caveat here. I'm not going to talk about only the tourism, or rather, for that matter, I'm not going to talk about tourism that much at all. I would rather talk about how these islands, and especially the Andamans, were discovered. As I said, the Andamans in Nicobar Island is a collection of 572 islands. It's an archipelago. That means वो द्वीप समूह है. It's a collective. It's a collection of islands, string of islands to say of, that we call archipelago. 572 in numbers, which has division of Andaman's part and the Nicobarese part, the Nicobar. I'm going to talk about the Andaman's Island. Discovery of Andamans. कैसे हुआ? Why only Andamans? Because Nicobar was known. Well, you'd be surprised to know that between Andamans and Nicobar, आज की तारीख में Andamans is open to tourism, whereas Nicobar is not. But historically, Nicobar was known for the travelers, for the sea traders, for marine surveyors, much before Andamans came to be known. निकोबार से गुजरते हुए जहाज जो थे, जैसे कि निकोबार पड़ता है मलाका स्ट्रेट पे, दैट इज वन ऑफ द बिजिएस्ट सी रूट इवन टिल दिस डे. So you have a lot of these travelers from the European countries. You have Dutch, you have Austrian, you have Portuguese, French, Colonials, the British, and even Moravians. Moravians have come to had gone to Nicobar for the purpose of missionaries. So and of course the ethnicity of Nicobaris is different from the Andamanese people. Now, to understand the ethnicity between the Andamanese and Nicobaris, there is a common string. 65,000 years ago, 65,000 साल पहले, जैसे मैंने बताया था एक अपने पुराने एपिसोड में कि आउट ऑफ अफ्रीका माइग्रेशन होती है, जिससे जो जो फर्स्ट जो ट्रांच था, जो पहला ग्रुप था जो आउट ऑफ अफ्रीका माइग्रेंट्स का निकला इथियोपिया से, they traveled from Horn of Africa to Middle East and then crossing the passes, and they came to the Indian subcontinent. They settled here. They have intermingling with the already existing population in the peninsular India. And then they started traveling. Another part started traveling. So उसके बाद चलते चलते they crossed over from what is now Bangladesh and Myanmar, Thailand. और वहीं से जो होते होते जो है one group possibly would have settled in Andamans and Nicobar Islands. Now I'm talking about it, so ऐसा मत समझे कि वो real time ऐसा हो रहा है. These processes in primitive times, in the times when we're talking about the history of mankind, it's fairly lengthy process. ऐसा नहीं है कि हमने बात की है और बस आप जो है 4-5 साल में हो गए. It would have taken at least 400 to 500 years of a group discovering some islands. Then they would be having running their own test about the feasibility of living over there, whether they can get some food and water to survive on. They can get some hospitable conditions. They can build their homes in whatever shapes they were living in those days. So uske baad jaake they would have settled on taking decision ki okay, now we can live in these islands. So ye hote hote kai time laga. So we can roughly say around 60,000 years ago, first human settlement would have set their foot in Andaman's Island. और तकरीबन उसके कुछ टाइम बाद जो है तकरीबन शायद 1 से 150 या 200 साल बाद जो हम कह सकते हैं कि they would have gone down, fared south, discovering their own marine routes, and they would have discovered the Nicobarese island. In between, जो निकोबार में हैं, there were a lot of intermingling from the southern Eastern Asian communities, जिसके बाद जो है even their language took a different form. So the language groups of Andamanese people and Nicobarese people is different. The Nicobarese family languages comes under the broader umbrella of Austroasiatic, whereas the Andamanese comes under language isolates, and some of them possibly would have some sort of affinity, one could say, with the archaic languages that are yet to be classified. Now, we know for the fact that due to colonial rule, a lot of the population of the indigenous people of Andamans and of course even Nicobar were destroyed. I mean, they were simply killed, they vanished. Some of the act would have been deliberate by the part of the colonials because they were out to control the islands पे control करना चाहते थे, और इसके कारण जो है they would have been skirmishes between the original inhabitants, the indigenous people, and the British soldiers, जिसके कारण जो है हम ये आसानी से इस बात को मान सकते हैं कि the locals would have suffered heavy losses. Now, before going there and dissecting what would have happened during the colonial times, I just want to give a small run through. As I said, Nicobarese Islands were known to the ancient mariners. They used to go there, take the Malacca Strait, traveling from Europe to Polynesia and to Australia. So these routes are well known, and Nicobarese people would have been amongst the ones where they would have a fair degree of interaction between those mariners and the locals, whereas Andamanese were totally out of touch. So around 1788, when East India Company was on spree of expanding, they were exploring the waters of Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean as well. Bay of Bengal में they had sent their marine survey, which was led by the marine surveyor Lieutenant Akibal there. Archibald Blair वहाँ जाते हैं 1788 में, December 1788 में sets its foot over there, and the entire process takes some 4 months, and by April 1789 he recommends that we can possibly have some sort of feasibility to live or have a settlement in Andaman Islands. इसको जो है हम लोग ट्राई कर सकते हैं कि यहाँ पे रहा जा सकता है. So there was a settlement. The first British settlement comes in here in 1789, and the settlement was short-lived. I mean, I can only say जो भी available literature है, जो भी available history है, उसकी जितना भी हम लोगों के पास access है, and of course my history of making films and documentaries on the subject of history of Indian cities and Indian places, मैं इतनी जानकारी जुटा पाया हूँ कि तकरीबन 6 साल तक पहली अंग्रेजी सेटलमेंट रहती है 1789 से 1796 में वहाँ से वो लोग रवाना हो जाते हैं. उसके देयर वर कपल ऑफ रीजंस. पहला ये था कि देयर वाज आउटब्रेक ऑफ अननोन डिजीज. मोस्ट लाइकली इट वुड हैव बीन कॉलरा और मलेरिया, and possibly they would have found the terrain slightly unsuitable because जो अंग्रेज लोग थे they liked more of cooler climes and slightly more pleasant weather. But Andamans उसमें जो है मौसम एक टाइम पे ठीक होता है क्योंकि it's still untouched. There is no rapid industrialization over there, so AQI always remains in the zone of green. तो वहाँ पर जो है sea sometimes had a tendency of becoming rough. Even today it gets rough. It's the nature of Bay of Bengal. So maybe that would have been one of the reasons. लेकिन हम ये जानते हैं कि 6 साल तक वहाँ पे सेटलमेंट रही, और उसके बाद 1858 में, now after the first war of independence, after mutiny of 1857, a lot of Indian freedom fighters who have raised revolt against the British, the East India Company, were jailed. They were caught, they were tried, they were put to trial, and they were jailed. They were given punishments. तो अंग्रेजों को लगा कि let's if there is a way to cut them off from the mainland so that their writings, their revolutionary thoughts will not instigate or will not inspire other Indians, so we should find a settlement which is far away from the mainland. तो उनको लगा कि ठीक है, 60 साल पहले we had done a survey in the middle of the Bay of Bengal, and we found that there is a settlement where at least we can have some sort of a distant colony. तो वहाँ पे जो है जो first branch जो है inmates की आई, which were the great freedom fighters of 1857 mutiny. That included great revolutionaries and freedom fighters of 1857 mutiny like Maharaja Brij Kishore Singh Deo and Maulana Fazl Haq Khairabadi. These were great people. These are fantastic people, and a lot of freedom fighters and a lot of revolutionaries and a lot of intellectuals who were part of Wahhabi movement, who was part of the Namdhari movement, where British thought कि ये हमारे लिए आगे खतरा हो सकते हैं. They were all of them were sent over there to the Andaman Island. तो पहली जो अंग्रेज सेटलमेंट थी वहाँ पे अंडमान्स में, जो आज पोर्ट ब्लेयर के हिस्से के थोड़ा सा ही दूर है, चाथम आइलैंड. बिल्कुल जो वहाँ पे आप फीनिक्स बे जाएंगे और पोर्ट ब्लेयर के, और फीनिक्स बे से थोड़ा सा ही दूर जो है वी हैव अ चाथम आइलैंड, और चाथम आइलैंड पे पहली उनकी सेटलमेंट रही. लेकिन सिर्फ एक सेटलमेंट ही नहीं थी, बाद में वहाँ चल के जो फीनिक्स बे के पास जो है पोर्ट ब्लेयर वॉर्फ बनता है. वॉर्फ मीन्स जहाँ पे शिप्स पार्क होते हैं, जहाँ पे उनको जो है एक तरह से मेंटेनेंस भी किया जाता है. सो बेसिकली द बिगर पोर्ट इज कॉल्ड वॉर्फ, वो वहाँ पे बनाया गया. वाइपर आइलैंड जो कि नेस्ल्ड है, इट्स बिटवीन दैट लिटिल कर्व ऑफ आइलैंड्स विदिन पोर्ट ब्लेयर and within Greater Andamans, वहीं के बीच में you have a Viper Island. वहाँ पर एक जेल बनना शुरू होती है. That was the first penal colony of India, Viper Island Jail. Today, there are just very few remains of that large complex of jail. It was an open jail, but it had its own places of solitude, confinement, of punishment, like the Gallows House, which is right on the hilltop, just a small hillock of Viper Island. And Yeah, there used to be a boundary wall which was enclosing the jail. We don't get to see that anymore. Well, these are the pictures of Andaman's Viper Jail. The first settlement. You really have to go over there, sit over there, see, think about it, wonder what they would have gone through, what the inmates would have gone through who were brought in here from their homes, far, far away from their homes, from the mainland to here in solitude. These remains still somewhat talks to us. The Viper Jail was also witness to one of the extremely important landmarks in the history of colonial India. Well, Lord Mayo, British Governor General Lord Mayo, he was assassinated over there. He was killed by inmate Sher Ali Khan Afridi. Sher Ali Khan Afridi, he was undergoing jail treatment in Viper Jail. He was brought in from Northwest Frontier Province for some personal family crime, and he was brought in here, but he was quite enraged after hearing what all British were doing to the compatriots. So one day when Lord Mayo was just, he was just strolling to see the setting sun, he was simply caught by Sher Ali Khan Afridi and he was killed. Now, Sher Ali Khan Afridi was put to trial and of course he was hung inside Viper Jail only, but that also talks about the valor and courage of the freedom fighters. So really, as we go forward, you will discover how this particular island, Andamans, and this particular area of Port Blair is so rich in history about Indian freedom struggle. That is one of the very important focal point about the development of the Andaman Island. History of Indian freedom struggle. Well, आज की तारीख में पोर्ट ब्लेयर का नाम चेंज होकर श्री विजयपुरम हो गया है, but popularly still referred to as Port Blair, especially if you talk about, as a tourist destination, and even the other islands which are nearby, like Swaraj Deep, Shahid Deep, Netaji Subhash Chandra Deep, which were earlier named or were earlier having the names after the colonial rulers like Ross, Neil, Havelock. So उनका जो है, they were Indianized just a few years ago. Now, for time being, Viper Jail started to become a regular place for sending the prisoners in exile, and especially to cut them off from the mainland. At the same time, paradoxically, we see that there were certain rules in Viper Jail which were little comparatively, one could say, relaxed, in the sense it was an open jail. You were not really in the confines of any particular cell or area. So what happened? Some of the inmates जो इनको अपनी jail term पूरा करने के बाद वो back to the mainland, वो कहा करते थे कि we are having gala time. वहाँ तो कोई जो है cell नहीं है, कोई कमरा नहीं है, कोई कोठरी नहीं है, so it's a wonderful thing. तो उसके बाद जो है there are reports that some of the inmates in mainland, they started requesting that they should be transferred to the Viper Jail in Andamans. उसके बाद जो है एक prison committee बनाई जाती है अंग्रेजों द्वारा, basically so as to analyze how far their act of having an open jail working or not. Mind you, these British, these colonials were very firm in their idiosyncrasy of having an iron fist sort of a rule. उनको था कि हमें राज करना है और पूरे तरीके से करना है, so that our fear, जो उनका डर है, सबके अंदर रहे, so that they are respected and they are followed. And उसी के तहत they formed 2-member committee of James Charles Lyell and A.S. Lethbridge. Charles Lyell was also Home Secretary of British India at that point. So उनके टाइम पे कमेटी बनती है और उसके बाद जो है they recommend that they need to be slightly firm and more punitive in their punishment and in their treatment of the prisoners. जिसके बाद they decide to build another fortress of a jail which will be extremely strict in the instruments of torture, I would say. That's the only word I can come up with. इतने ज़्यादा वहाँ पे अत्याचार हुए जिसकी कहानी हम आज भी सुनते हुए आते हैं. सेलुलर जेल, काला पानी जेल जिसको कहा जाता है. और तो काला पानी नाम जो है स्टार्ट हो गया था एग्जाइल से और वाइपर जेल से, बट जो मॉडर्न हमारा जो पार्लांस है और कह सकते हैं जो मॉडर्न डिस्कोर्स में हम बात करते हैं काला पानी की, वो हम सेलुलर जेल की बात करते हैं. 1896 में काला पानी जेल या सेलुलर जेल बनना शुरू होती है, 1906 में ख़त्म होती है. सेलुलर जेल इसको इसलिए भी कहा जाता है क्योंकि इस जेल में जो विंग्स थे, देयर वर 7 विंग्स इन ऑल, और हर विंग में देयर वर सॉलिटरी सेल. हालांकि सेल एक दूसरे के बगल में थे, बट द वे दे वर डिजाइंड लाइक अ पेंटोनविल प्रिजन स्टाइल, दैट वाज द वे in which a Pentonville prison was made in England, and there was another prison in Rajamundry, and there was another prison in Melbourne in Australia. उसके तहत, उस डिज़ाइन के तहत सेलुलर जेल को बनाया गया, जिसमें हर एक विंग में जो कैदी थे वो दूसरे को नहीं देख सकते थे. उनके पीछे एक लंबी दीवार थी जिसके ऊपर एक रोशनदान हुआ करता था, और सामने बहुत ही भारी दरवाज़ा हुआ करता था जिसमें जो है तकरीबन 3/4 जो है दीवार हुआ करती थी. तो क्लियरली दे कुड नॉट सी व्हाट इज हैपनिंग टू द नेक्स्ट ऑफ द इनमेट, या सामने क्या हो रहा है, बिकॉज देयर वाज अ लॉन्ग कॉरिडोर, जिसके बाद जो है उनका विजन ब्लॉक हो जाया करता था. सो बहुत ही थॉट प्रोसेस के बाद जो है एक बहुत ही क्रूर और बहुत ही क्रूअल थॉट प्रोसेस के बाद कह सकते हैं कि ये जेल डिज़ाइन की गई थी, और बहुत क्रूरता यहाँ पे हुई थी. I mean, it's difficult to even define. आप जाएंगे Andamans, आप जाएंगे Cellular Jail, so you will find the stories in silence. You know, those walls, those corridors, that silence will speak with you. It will talk to you. You will hear the stories in silence. In complete silence, you will hear those stories yourself. Nobody needs to tell you anything else. You don't need to read any placard, but you'll hear yourself out. क्या क्या होता था वहाँ पर. It's really sad that that chapter, one of the worst chapters of freedom struggle, where our brave freedom fighters faced so much torture. It was written over there. But as we say, हर रात के बाद एक सुबह आती है. सो 1936 में जो है सेलुलर जेल बंद हो गई थी, एंड जो सारे इनमेट्स थे दे वर रिपैट्रिएटेड बैक टू द मेनलैंड. सम ऑफ देम आल्सो चोज टू स्टे ओवर देयर. कई फ्रीडम फाइटर्स, उनको लगा कि हम यहीं रहते हैं, और वो यहीं रहे, और पीढ़ी दर पीढ़ी जो है वो अंडमान्स के विकास में, खास करके पोर्ट ब्लेयर के विकास में, श्रीविजयपुरम के विकास में जो है लगे रहे. आज जो है उन्हीं की सेकेंड या थर्ड जनरेशन जो है आज वहाँ काम कर रही है. और आप जब भी वहाँ जाते हैं एज अ टूरिस्ट, सो यू सी द वार्म हॉस्पिटैलिटी, एंड दे आर द वंस हुज ग्रैंडपेरेंट्स, हुज great grandparents who suffered at the hands of the British, at the hands of the colonizers, and they have only love and compassion for you. Clearly, it's one place which I would like to visit too often, and given my work schedule, I would want to make one more film over there. Let's see वो कब होता है. But before closing it on, one very important part जो कह सकते हैं शायद आगे जाके it will be really important and significant for us. जो हमें आज हिस्ट्री पता है अंडमान्स की, वो शुरू होती है तकरीबन 1788 से. उसके पहले, as I said, there is very less written about it. We can only have the guesswork and the proven theory about out of Africa migration, जिसका एक रूट बनता है जिससे हम easily कह सकते हैं कि यहाँ पे सेटलमेंट रही होगी. अंडमान्स में 5 मेन इंडिजिनस ट्राइब्स थी: ओंगीज, ग्रेट अंडमानीज, जांगिल, जारवाज एंड सेंटिनल्स. इसमें से कुछ वर्ड्स जो हैं द कलोनियल वर्ड्स, लाइक ग्रेट अंडमानीज, क्लियरली इट्स एन इंग्लिश वर्ड. सेंटिनल, इट्स एन इंग्लिश वर्ड. जांगिल जो है, इट्स अ ट्राइब दैट वेंट एक्सटिंक्ट बिकॉज ऑफ द ब्रिटिश रूल. they were simply killed, and they were like, just to occupy the islands. British started targeting the locals because, of course, there would have been some skirmishes as the British started to set foot in. They were outsiders, और जो वहाँ के लोग हैं उन्होंने resist किया होगा और उस resistance को crush करने के लिए उनको मार दिया गया. It's really sad, but that happened. Or only British are responsible, and they are the ones who have done it deliberately. Accidentally शायद एक आध चीज़ें होंगी, but when the entire community goes on extinct, so there is a deliberate force involved into it. बाकियों के अगर आप numbers देखें तो तकरीबन जो है 100 से नीचे हैं ग्रेट अंडमानीज के, तकरीबन 101 हैं जारवास के, ओंगीज के 200 के ऊपर के हैं, और जो सेंटिनल्स हैं गेस वर्क है कि 30 से ऊपर हैं. इंटरेस्टिंगली जो ग्रेट अंडमानीज हैं वो एजिमिलेट हो गए हैं जो हमारे आजकल के मॉडर्न कल्चर में. दे आर ऑल्सो वर्किंग इन रेगुलर जॉब्स. They're also having their own shops and businesses in their own areas, which is earmarked by the government. Jarawas are declared, tribes with which you cannot have any interaction because you will only end up harming them. So clearly, उनका जो areas हैं वहाँ पे जाना मना है. Ongis कुछ interaction है, कुछ जगहों पे जाना मना है, which is a great thing. Lastly, the Sentinels, only tribes which is cut off from the rest of the world voluntarily. वो खुद नहीं चाहते किसी से मिलना. There have been efforts made by the government. There have been efforts made by the Anthropological Survey of India, but there have been resistance. और जब वो realize हुआ कि वो resistance जो है, it's part of their own decision कि उनको आपके साथ assimilate नहीं होना, उनको mainstream के साथ नहीं मिलना. They're very happy, they're very content in their own life, in their own style of living. तो उनको जो है कंप्लीटली एक फ्रीडम दिया गया है, और वहाँ पे जो है किसी भी टूरिज्म एक्टिविटी का, किसी भी जो है ट्रैवल एक्टिविटी का जो उनका समुद्र का इलाका है उसके आसपास सब मना है. कई लोग ने जाने की कोशिश की है, बट दे हैव मेट एन अनफॉर्चुनेट फेट. वी ऑल नो दैट. सो क्लियरली वन कुड स्टे अवे फ्रॉम दैट. बट जिस दिन शायद वो अपने आप चाहेंगे कि they would want to assimilate, they would want to become a part of mainstream, or at least have a communication with us in somewhat way. We'll get to know the language first of all. We don't know the language yet. We'll have the information, rich information, first-hand information passed on from generation to generation कि वो लोग यहाँ कैसे पहुँचे. Possibly उस दिन हमें आइडिया होगा कि अंडमान का पूरा इतिहास क्या है. Well, that's it in this episode. Thanks for watching. As I said once again, thanks a lot for subscribing, and I hope I get more subscribers. Plus, keep writing to me. Keep letting me know what is the content you would like to watch so I make as per your wishes. Thank you. See you soon. Goodbye.